Occupy the Ukraine if you like, only help us. Let us form our army, it will be to your advantage, we'll help you to keep order in the Ukraine and prevent these God-forsaken peasants of ours from catching the Moscow disease. If there were a Russian manned army in the city now, we would be insulated from Moscow by a wall of steel. And as for Petliura, KKHH Turban drew his finger expressively across his throat and was seized by a furious coughing fit. Stop. Chervinsky stood up. Wait. I must speak in defense of the hetman. I admit some mistakes were made, but the hetman's plan was fundamentally correct. He knows how to be diplomatic. First of all, a Ukrainian state, then the hetman would have done exactly as you say, a Russian manned army and no nonsense. And to prove that I'm right, Chervinsky gestured solemnly toward the window, the imperial tricolor flag is already flying over Vladimirskaya Street. Too late. Well, yes, you may be right. It is rather late, but the hetman is convinced that the mistake can be rectified. I sincerely hope to God that it can, and Alexei Turban crossed himself in the direction of the icon of the Virgin in the corner of the room. Now the plan was as follows, Chervinsky announced solemnly. Once the war was over, the Germans would have recovered, and turned to help us against the Bolsheviks. Then when Moscow was captured, the hetman would have laid the allegiance of the Ukraine at the feet of His Majesty the Emperor Nicholas II. At this remark a deathly silence fell on the room. Nikolka turned white with agony. "But the Emperor is dead," he whispered. "What do you mean, Nicholas II?" asked Alexei Turban in a stunned voice, and Myshlyavsky, swaying, squinted drunkenly into Chervinsky's glass. Obviously Chervinsky had had one too many to keep his courage up. Leaning her head on one hand, Elena stared in horror at him. But Chervinsky was not particularly drunk. He raised his hand and said in a powerful voice, "Not so fast. Listen. But I beg you, gentlemen, to remain silent until I've finished what I have to say. I suppose you all know what happened when the hetman's suite was presented to Kaiser Wilhelm? We haven't the slightest idea," said Karas with interest. "Well, I know." "Ha! He knows everything," sneered Myshlavsky. Gentlemen, let him speak. After the Kaiser had graciously spoken to the hetman and his suite, he said, I shall now leave you, gentlemen. Discussion of the future will be conducted with. The drapes parted and into the hall came Tsar Nicholas II. Go back to the Ukraine, gentlemen, he said, and raise your regiments. When the moment comes, I shall place myself in person at the head of the army and lead it on to the heart of Russia, to Moscow. With these words he broke down and wept. Chervinsky beamed round at the whole company, tossed down a glass of wine in one gulp and grimaced. Ten eyes stared at him and silence reigned until he had sat down and eaten a slice of ham. See here, that's all a myth, said Alexei Turbin, frowning painfully. I've heard that story before. They were all murdered, said Myshlavsky, the Tsar, the Tsarina and the heir. Chervinsky glanced sideways towards the stove, took a deep breath and declared, You are making a mistake if you believe that. The news of His Imperial Majesty's death is slightly exaggerated, said Myshlavsky in a drunken attempt at wit. Elena shivered indignantly and boomed out of the haze at him. You should be ashamed at yourself, Victor, you, an officer. Myshlavsky sank back into the mist. Was purposely invented by the Bolsheviks, Chervinsky went on. The emperor succeeded in escaping with the aid of his faithful tutor, of the Tsarevich's tutor, Monsieur Gilliard and several officers, who conveyed him to Asia. From there they reached Singapore and thence by sea to Europe. Now the emperor is the guest of Kaiser Wilhelm. But wasn't the Kaiser thrown out too? Karas inquired. They are both in Denmark, with Her Majesty the Empress Dowager Maria Fyodorovna, who is a Danish princess by birth. If you don't believe me, I may tell you that I was personally told this news by the hetman himself. Nikolka groaned inwardly, his soul racked with doubt and confusion. He wanted to believe it. Then if it's true, he suddenly burst out, jumping to his feet and wiping the sweat from his brow, I propose a toast, to the health of His Imperial Majesty. His glass flashed, the cut crystal arrows on its side piercing the German white wine. Spurs clinked against chair legs. Swaying, Myshlayevsky stood up and clutched the table. Elena stood up.